Can you believe I've taken over 34,000 photos with this camera in just around 6 months? And the best bit is, a year ago, I said I would never buy one. What's changed? In this video, I'm going to be revealing what it's been like using the Sony A7 IV over the last few months on a professional level, photographing over 30 weddings. How the video limiting capabilities of this camera have worked against me, or in some situations, how they've benefited me. And how is it really in comparison to the much more expensive Sony A7S Mark III and the much newer Sony A7R Mark V. And after all of that, if you aren't subscribed to the channel already, but you are a massive Sony guy like I am, subscribe. Everything I make on this channel is with a Sony camera, so I hope you learn something along the way, and it massively helps me grow this channel. Now, when it comes to photography and videography these days, you need something which is going to be reliable, something that performs well, fast, and provides great results. However, straight away, this camera does come with some limitations. The autofocus on this camera is really good. However, it doesn't come with the new AI autofocus system that Sony are now implementing into their newer cameras. And the subject recognition is limited to just human, animal, and bird. However, for the kind of work that I do, the autofocus in this has been great. It's been pretty much on point 99% of the time. And the other 1%, well, there's no one else using the camera, so it's my fault. An important thing for me is being inspired when you're behind the camera using the camera. The last thing you want to do is look through the EVF or on the screen and just be a little demotivated by the quality of the image. And luckily the image quality is fairly well represented in my opinion on this camera. There's actually something about it that I actually prefer over my other Sony cameras. I don't know what it is, it's really hard to explain. I can show you on a recording, however, you probably won't get the same effect. There's also a bit of a sweet spot when it comes to cameras and their pixel count as well. A lot of people say that the cameras that only provide a 12 megapixel image is a little bit too low for their liking. And I'd have to agree because there's huge limitations when it comes to cropping in post. However, at the same time, on the other end of the scale, 61 megapixels is, for a lot of people, fairly overkill. And that's where this camera falls in nicely. Let's say the Goldilocks of the Sony world. Not too much, not too little. This gives you a 33 megapixel image, which is plenty big enough for any kind of printing. You can crop it if you wish when it comes to editing, or you can crop into APS-C mode in camera if you wish, and that will give you around 14 megapixels. But let's talk about the features on this camera which makes it so good to use. One of my favorite features is actually the mode selection wheel. At first I did say I wasn't a massive fan of it, but I think it's because I was so used to what the Sony A7S III was like and all the previous cameras before that. But with this new dial setup, you can go from photo to video to S&Q mode and back with just a flick of the finger rather than actually having to take your hand off and be able to move the wheel. It's just really useful when you're in them high pressure situations, when you got to capture as much content as possible and there's no chance of redoing it later on. But there's one feature I've found on this camera, and if you're not using it, you're mental, or simply you don't know it exists. But let's change that. When you're in these high pressure environments and you're having to do photo and video all at the same time and you're switching between all the modes, sometimes it can be really annoying. Maybe you're taking photos at 1/250th of a second, but your video, because you're filming at 24 or 25 frames a second, you want your shutter speed to be 1/50. Having to change that setting every time you change the mode can become really frustrating. This setting is in the Operation Customize menu. Go down to different set for movie and still, then you just need to tick the settings that you want to keep independent from movie and still mode and press OK. Don't worry, you can thank me later. When you look back at some of the older cameras such as the Sony A7 III, the A7 IV has come a long way, and it is a great camera for any amateur or even professional photographer to get great quality photos. However, this isn't just a photography camera. It's a photography camera with some video capabilities, but have Sony bottlenecked the camera and held back in some areas. When I want a camera for video work, I want to be able to film in 4K, preferably in log to help with the dynamic range, and also 10-bit footage so it helps when it comes to color grading. And I want that camera to also be able to film in 4K at 50 FPS at the very least. And even though this camera does just that, it does deliver the 4K 50 frames per second in APS-C mode. With that 1.5 times crop, it'll take a 16mm lens to around 24mm or a 50mm to 75mm. And this right here is possibly, for me, one of the most annoying things, but also one of the better things on the camera. I'm a little bit in between. Let me explain. Now, we use this a fair bit when it comes to the weddings, especially for filming at the back of the room during just the ceremony. At 25 FPS, you could film in full frame. However, if you need a little bit more reach, you can use a clear image zoom, and that'll allow you to go into APS-C mode. I don't think we've ever had to use it, but it's there if you ever need it. However, the way we actually do our wedding films is that a lot of it is in slow motion. It's what the clients seem to want, and that's what we consistently go for. Now, for us, we shoot on primes pretty much all day long. But due to the 1.5 times crop that you get in S&Q mode, you do have to think about how you're gonna do the shots. For instance, in the morning during the bridal prep, I normally shoot at 35mm for all of my photos. However, when it comes to shooting hybrid, this is gonna be a little bit too tight, and I have to either reach for a 20 or a 24mm to be able to get the look that I want. So to make things easier on the video side, what I normally do is just reach for a Sony A7S III so that I'm still using two cameras. And that light's just gone off. How annoying. However, in the evening when we're doing portraits, if I'm shooting on a 50 or an 85mm on this camera, I can still use the video if I need to. And that's because I'm outside, so I can just back up a few meters and get the footage that I need, and it still looks incredible. But something I do need to point out is that using a 50mm in crop mode won't actually give you the same look as a 75mm lens if there was one. It just gives you the same field of view. However, as annoying as that feature is when it comes to the weddings, when it comes to making YouTube videos here on the channel, that feature is actually a benefit. Most of the time when I'm out making videos, I'm using a 16-35. However, 35mm doesn't always give me the look that I want when it comes to any kind of B-roll. For a lot of that, I normally reach for something like a 50 or an 85mm. But also because you're outside traveling, sometimes you only want to take one lens with you. Now with the A7 IV and the 16-35 in crop mode, that 35mm becomes a 50mm plus a little bit extra on top, therefore solving my problem. Now with this camera being half the price of the A7S III and the Sony A7R5, would you regret buying one? Should you just save your money for a little bit longer and buy one of the others instead? At this point, you simply just need to prioritize what you want from your camera. Do you need more photography features, videography features, or just a nice selection of both? If you want to stay as a hybrid shooter but don't want to break the bank, then this is pretty much the perfect camera for you. However, the Sony A7S III, which I'm using now, is a very much video-based camera, and is possibly one of the best video cameras on the market alongside the FX3. Those two cameras have a better ISO range for noise when it comes to filming in log, minimal rolling shutter, and in general, they're just better cameras when it comes to filming. Whereas when it comes to just photography, this is much better. But what about the Sony A7R5? Well, that is like an A7 IV, but on steroids. Higher pixel count, better autofocus, more autofocus modes, more photo features such as pixel shift technology and focus stacking. But when it comes to the video in S&Q mode, it has a smaller crop. But if you want to know more about the Sony A7R5, then watch this video right here. However, if you are dead set on the Sony A7 IV, but you just need a really versatile lens to go with it, then watch this video right here because I'm selling two of my Sony lenses for that. I'll see you soon. Laters.